The morning sun was just starting to peek through the large windows of Adventure Rock Climbing Gym. It was going to be another busy Saturday, and he could already hear the sounds of early climbers getting their gear ready. After 3 years of working here, he knew exactly what to expect. The regulars would show up first, then the weekend warriors, and finally the nervous beginners who had been thinking about trying rock climbing for months. He loved his job as an instructor. There was something special about watching people discover they could do things they never thought possible. Every day brought new faces, new fears to overcome, and new victories to celebrate. Some people came in acting tough but got scared halfway up the wall. Others came in shaking like leaves but ended up being natural climbers. The gym was starting to fill up now. He could see a few familiar faces setting up their routes, checking their gear, and warming up with easy climbs. The sound of carabiners clicking and ropes being pulled filled the air. It was music to his ears. Then he noticed her. She was standing near the front desk, looking around like she had accidentally walked into the wrong building. Her hands kept moving to her phone, checking it over and over again. She would look up at the climbing walls, then back down at her phone, then around at all the other climbers who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Everything about her screamed first-timer. The brand new athletic clothes that still had creases from being folded in the store, the way she kept adjusting her ponytail, the nervous energy that made her shift her weight from one foot to the other every few seconds. He had seen this look thousands of times before. It was the look of someone who had made a decision to try something completely outside their comfort zone, and now they were wondering if they had made a terrible mistake. She was probably in her mid-20s, and there was something determined about the way she held herself despite being obviously nervous. This wasn't someone who gave up easily. She had made it this far, after all. Most people who were really scared never even made it through the front door. The climbing walls stretched up toward the ceiling, covered in colorful holes that created different routes of varying difficulty. To experienced climbers, they looked like puzzles waiting to be solved, but to someone who had never climbed before, they probably looked like impossible mountains. Other climbers moved around the gym with easy confidence. They knew which holds to grab, how to tie their knots, and how to belay each other safely. They chatted casually while doing things that would terrify most people. This probably made her feel even more out of place. He watched as she finally approached the front desk. The conversation was brief, and he could see her nodding as the staff member explained something. Then she was given a clipboard with forms to fill out. Her hand was shaking slightly as she wrote. This was clearly a big deal for her. People don't usually shake when they sign up for something unless it really matters to them. Maybe she was facing a fear of heights. Maybe someone had challenged her to try it. Maybe she was going through some kind of life change and wanted to prove something to herself. Whatever her reason, he could tell this meant something important to her. The nervous energy wasn't just about trying a new activity. This felt deeper. Than that, he decided to give her a few more minutes to get settled before introducing himself. Sometimes people needed a moment to take in their surroundings and work up their courage. Pushing too fast could make someone feel overwhelmed before they even started. The gym was getting busier now. More climbers were arriving, and the sound level was rising. Conversations, instructions being called out, and the occasional cheer. When someone completed a difficult route created a lively atmosphere. But all of this activity might have been making her feel even more like she didn't belong. She finished filling out her paperwork and handed it back to the front desk. Then, she just stood there, looking around again. It was clear she had no idea what to do next. Should she start climbing? Wait for someone to help her? Find the equipment somehow? He had learned over the years that this was often the hardest moment for new climbers. They had made the decision to come. They had signed up, but now they were faced with actually doing it. The gap between wanting to try something and actually taking that first step could feel enormous. That's when he decided it was time to step in. Part of being a good instructor was knowing when someone needed help, even if they hadn't asked for it yet, and she definitely needed help. He walked over with his usual friendly approach, not too eager, which could seem pushy, but warm enough. to make her feel welcome. After 3 years of this, he had learned how to read people pretty well. She needed someone to be patient and encouraging, not someone who would rush her through everything. When he introduced himself and asked if this was her first time climbing, the relief on her face was obvious. She had been hoping someone would help her figure out what to do next. This was exactly the kind of moment he loved about his job, taking someone from feeling lost and scared to feeling excited and capable. She told him she had always been afraid of heights, but decided it was time to face that fear. There was something in her voice that suggested this decision was connected to bigger changes in her life, maybe a recent breakup, a new job, or just reaching an age where she was tired of letting fear hold her back. Whatever had brought her here, he was glad she had made it through the door. Some of his best success stories had started exactly like this, with someone scared but determined to try something new. The combination of fear and determination often created the most rewarding transformations. He could see the mix of excitement and terror in her eyes as he began explaining the equipment. This was always the most important part of working with new climbers. If they didn't feel safe and confident with their gear, nothing else would matter. "Let's start with the basics," he said, picking up a climbing harness from the equipment rack. "This might look complicated, but it's actually pretty simple once you understand what everything does." She pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app. He had to smile at that. Most beginners tried to remember everything, but she was being smart about it. Taking notes showed she was serious about learning this properly. "You don't have to write down everything," he told her gently. "I'll remind you of anything important, but I like that you're being careful about this." The equipment room had that familiar smell of rubber and chalk that came with any climbing gym. Harnesses hung on hooks, helmets were stacked on shelves, and climbing shoes were organized by size. To him, it was like a second home. To her, it probably looked like a confusing maze of straps and buckles. He started with the helmet, showing her how the adjustment system worked. "This isn't just about rocks falling from above," he explained, "though that can happen. It's also about protecting your head if you swing into the wall during a fall." She nodded seriously, writing something on her phone. He noticed her hands weren't shaking as much now. Having something specific to focus on was helping her nerves. Next came the climbing shoes. He pulled out a pair in her size and showed her how they were supposed to fit. "These are going to feel really tight compared to regular shoes," he warned her. "They're supposed to be snug so you can feel the holds better with your feet." When she tried them on, her face scrunched up. "They feel like they're squeezing my toes." "That's normal," he laughed. "Everyone makes that face the first time. You'll get used to it. And for today's climbing, they won't bother you too much. We're not doing anything too advanced." She took a few careful steps, getting used to how the shoes felt. He could see her testing how they gripped the floor, starting to understand why they were designed that way. Then came the belay device. This was where most beginners started to look overwhelmed. So he always took extra time with this part. "This little piece of metal is what keeps you safe," he said, holding up the device. "When your climbing partner has this attached properly, they can catch you if you fall. And when you're the one belaying, you're responsible for keeping them safe." He showed her how the rope threaded through the device, how the carabiner locked it to her harness, and how moving the device controlled whether the rope could slide through or not. She watched intently, asking him to repeat a couple of steps. "Can you show me again how the rope goes through?" she asked. He demonstrated 3 more times, letting her try it herself on the 4th attempt. Her movements were careful and deliberate. She wasn't trying to rush through this part, which was exactly what he wanted to see. Perfect. He said when she got it right, "You're being really careful about this." And that's the most important thing in climbing. People who rush through the safety stuff are the ones who get hurt. Now came the part he knew would make her most nervous, the harness. He picked up the harness and held it out, so she could see all the different parts. "This looks more complicated than it is," he said. "There are leg loops that go round your thighs, and a waist belt that goes round your waist. Everything else is just buckles and gear loops." She studied it for a moment, and he could see her trying to figure out how it all worked. "How do I know if it's on right?" That's what I'm here for, he replied. Getting the fit right is really important for safety and comfort. A harness that's too loose won't hold you properly if you fall. Too tight, and it'll be uncomfortable and might cut off circulation. He demonstrated on himself first, showing her how he stepped into the leg loops, pulled the waist belt up to the right position, and adjusted all the buckles. See how it sits on my waist, not my hips? And these leg loops should be snug, but not cutting into your legs. When he took off his harness and handed her the one size for her, he could see the nervousness returning to her face. This was always a vulnerable moment for people. Having someone else help adjust equipment that went around your body required a certain level of trust. I can help you get it adjusted properly, he offered. Or if you prefer, I can talk you through doing it yourself, whatever makes you more comfortable. She looked at the harness, then at him, then back at the harness. He could see her thinking it through. Finally, she nodded. I think I'll need help. I want to make sure it's right. Absolutely, he said. Safety first, always. I'll explain everything I'm doing as we go, and if you want me to stop or adjust anything, just let me know. This was the moment where his years of experience really mattered. He had helped hundreds of people with their gear, and he knew how to do it professionally while making people feel comfortable and safe. It was about being efficient, but not rushed, thorough, but not overwhelming. He had no idea that this particular moment was about to become something neither of them would ever forget. The moment she stepped into the harness, he could sense something was different. Her whole body language changed. Where she had been nervous but engaged just seconds before, now she seemed to freeze up completely. He was kneeling beside her, adjusting the leg loops to make sure they fit properly around her thighs. This was routine for him. He had done this hundreds of times with climbers of all ages and experience levels. His movements were quick and efficient, the way they always were when he was focused on getting someone's gear fitted correctly. But as he reached up to adjust the waist belt, pulling it snug around her waist, he noticed her breathing had changed. It wasn't the normal nervousness of a first-time climber anymore. This was something else entirely. She had gone completely still. Her hands, which had been relaxed at her sides, were now clenched into tight fists. Her breathing was shallow and quick. When he looked up at her face, she was staring straight ahead, at the climbing wall, but he could tell she wasn't really seeing it. He immediately stopped what he was doing. Hey, he said softly, his hands moving away from the harness. You okay up there? She didn't respond right away. Her eyes were focused on something far away, like she was somewhere else entirely. He had seen this kind of reaction before, though not often. Sometimes people had experiences in their past that made certain situations feel overwhelming, even when they were completely safe. The gym continued buzzing with activity around them. Other climbers were getting ready for their routes, calling out encouragement to their partners, and celebrating successful climbs. But in their small corner of the equipment area, everything felt frozen in time. He stayed kneeling where he was, not moving to continue with the harness adjustment. Years of working with people had taught him that in moments like this, the worst thing you could do was rush or act like nothing was happening. We can take a break if you need to, he said, keeping his voice calm and steady. There's no hurry. Here, her hands were trembling now, not the normal shaking that came with being nervous about climbing, but something deeper. She was fighting some kind of internal battle, and he could see it written all over her face. He glanced round to make sure they had privacy. The equipment area was tucked away from the main climbing floor, and most people were focused on their own preparations. Still, he positioned himself so that if anyone did look over, they wouldn't be able to see her distress. Would you like me to step back, he asked, or would you prefer to adjust the harness yourself? We can do whatever makes you most comfortable. That seemed to break through whatever was happening in her mind. She blinked a few times, like she was coming back to the present moment. When she looked down at him, her eyes were watery. I'm sorry, she whispered, and her voice was shaky. I don't know what just happened. You don't need to apologize, he said immediately. This happens sometimes. There's nothing wrong with needing a moment. He could see her trying to pull herself together, taking deep breaths and unclenching her fists. But there was still something fragile about her expression, like she was holding onto her composure by a thread. "Do you want to sit down for a minute?" he offered, gesturing toward a bench nearby. "We can take as much time as you need." She shook her head, but not in a dismissive way, more like she was trying to clear her thoughts. "I want to keep going," she said, though her voice was still unsteady. I need." She trailed off, struggling to find the right words. He waited patiently, not trying to fill the silence or guess what she was thinking. Sometimes people needed space to figure out how to say what they were feeling. The harness was still only partially adjusted. One leg loop was properly fitted, but the waist belt was loose and the other leg loop needed work. They were in this awkward in-between state where she couldn't safely climb. But she also wasn't ready to continue. With the fitting process, he could see other instructors working, with their clients nearby. Their interactions looked easy and straightforward, simple explanations, quick gear adjustments, and then off to start climbing. He envied how normal their sessions seemed compared to what was happening here. But he also knew that these moments, as difficult as they were, often led to the most meaningful breakthroughs. Some of his most rewarding experiences as an instructor had come from helping people work through fears and obstacles that went far beyond just learning to climb. She was still standing there, looking down at the partially fitted harness, clearly wrestling with something internal. Her breathing was getting back to normal, but he could see the tension in her shoulders and the way she was holding herself. "I think," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I need you to go slower." The request caught him completely off guard. In all his years of instruction, no one had ever asked him to slow down the gear fitting process. Usually, people wanted to get through the equipment part as quickly as possible so they could start the fun part of actually climbing. But looking at her face, he could see this wasn't about impatience or eagerness. This was about something much more personal and important. "Of course," he said without hesitation. "We can go as slow as you need." The silence stretched between them for what felt like forever. He stayed exactly where he was, kneeling beside her, waiting for her to find whatever words she needed to say. The request to go slower had surprised him, but something in her voice told him there was much more to this story. She was looking down at him now, and he could see tears forming in the corners of her eyes. This wasn't about climbing anymore. This wasn't even about being afraid of heights. Something about this whole process had touched on something much deeper and more personal. "I need to tell you something," she said finally, her voice barely loud, enough for him to hear over the sounds of the busy gym around them. He nodded encouragingly but didn't say anything. Years of working with people had taught him that sometimes the best thing you could do was simply listen. She clearly had something important to share, and pushing her to talk faster would only make it harder. She took a shaky breath and looked around the gym, as if checking to make sure no one else was paying attention to their conversation. Most people were focused on their own climbing sessions, but she seemed to need that extra reassurance of privacy. "I've never had someone help me with equipment like this before," she began, then stopped herself. "I mean, I have, but not like this. Not with someone being so careful and respectful about it." He wasn't sure what she meant, but he could hear the emotion building in her voice. Whatever she was trying to tell him was clearly difficult for her to put into words. "In college, I played sports," she continued, speaking slowly like each word was hard to get out, "and there were coaches and trainers who helped with equipment and gear all the time. But they were always in such a hurry, always rushing through everything like it didn't matter how it felt for us." She paused again, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. He could see this was bringing up memories that were painful for her to think about. "Some of them weren't very professional about it," she said, her voice getting even quieter. "They would make comments or jokes, or they would touch us in ways that felt wrong. But we were told it was normal, that it was just part of the sport." His heart sank as he began to understand what she was trying to tell him. He had heard stories like this before, unfortunately. Too many young athletes had experiences with coaches or trainers who crossed boundaries and made them feel uncomfortable or unsafe. I learned to just freeze up and get through it, she continued, to go somewhere else in my mind until it was over. And I guess when you started adjusting my harness, something about it brought all of that back. She looked directly at him then, and he could see both vulnerability and strength in her expression. But the weird thing is, you weren't doing anything wrong. You were explaining everything, asking if I was okay, being so respectful about it. And that made me realize how different this could be. He felt a mixture of sadness for what she had been through, and honor that she had chosen to share something so personal with him. He also felt a deep responsibility to make sure the rest of this experience was everything it should be. I'm so sorry you went through that, he said softly. That should never have happened to you, and thank you for trusting me enough to tell me about it, she nodded, seeming a bit more steady now that she had gotten the words out. I almost left when I started feeling that way again, but then I realized this was different. You stopped the second you noticed something was wrong. You asked what I needed. No one had ever done that before. The gym continued its normal rhythm around them, but he was completely focused on her and what she was sharing. This conversation was more important than any climbing lesson he had ever given. When I asked you to go slower, she said, it wasn't really about the harness. It was about wanting to experience what it feels like when someone helps you with something like this the right way, with respect and patience and care. He understood now why this moment had been so overwhelming for her. She wasn't just learning to climb today, she was learning to trust again. She was discovering what it felt like to be treated with the dignity and respect she should have always received. We can absolutely go slower, he said, as slow as you need, and if at any point you want to stop or do something differently, just tell me. This is your experience, and we'll do it whatever way feels right for you. She smiled then, the first real smile he had seen from her all day. It transformed her whole face, replacing the anxiety and pain with something that looked like hope. I think I'd like to try again, she said. But maybe you could keep explaining what you're doing as you go? It helps me stay present instead of going back to those old memories. Absolutely, he replied. I'll tell you exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and you can ask me to stop or slow down anytime. She took a deep breath and squared her shoulders, like she was preparing for something important, and in a way, she was. This wasn't just about getting a harness fitted properly anymore. This was about reclaiming her sense of safety and trust. He could see the determination in her eyes as she nodded for him to begin again. This time would be different. This time, she would experience what it felt like to be treated with complete respect and care during a vulnerable moment. Okay, he said softly, positioning himself beside her again. I'm going to start with the leg loop that still needs adjusting. I'll move slowly and explain everything I'm doing. She stood a little straighter, her breathing more controlled now. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else, courage, maybe, or hope. I'm going to gently pull this strap to tighten the leg loop, he said, showing her exactly which part he was talking about before touching anything. You should feel it get snug around your thigh, but it shouldn't pinch or cut into your skin. Tell me when it feels right. His movements were deliberate and careful. Where before he had been efficient and professional, now he was being almost ceremonially gentle. Every adjustment was announced before he made it. Every buckle was explained before he touched it. How does that feel? He asked after adjusting. The first strap. Good, she said, and her voice was steadier than it had been all morning. I can feel that it's secure, but it's not uncomfortable. Perfect. Now I'm going to work on the waist belt. This is the most important part for your safety. So we want to make sure it sits exactly right on your waist. He showed her where the belt should sit, explaining how it needed to be positioned above her hip bones for maximum safety. Then, moving slowly, he began to adjust the buckles on either side. I'm tightening the left side now, he narrated. You should feel it getting snug, but you should still be able to breathe comfortably and move around. Something beautiful was happening as they went through this process. With each careful adjustment, each respectful explanation, she seemed to relax a little more. The tension in her shoulders was melting away. Her hands, which had been clenched into fists earlier, were now relaxed at her sides, now the right side. He continued, making the matching adjustment. This should feel balanced now, with the weight distributed evenly around your waist. It does, she said, and there was wonder in her voice. It feels secure, but not restrictive. I can see why this is so important for safety. He stepped back to check the overall fit, but also to give her space to process what was happening. How do you feel overall? Any pinching or discomfort anywhere? She took a few steps, testing how the harness felt when she moved. Then she did something that surprised him. She laughed, not a nervous laugh, but a genuine, happy sound. I feel strong, she said, looking down at the properly fitted harness. I feel like I'm wearing something that's designed to keep me safe, not something that's being forced on me. Other climbers and instructors in the area seemed to sense that something special was happening. Without being obvious about it, they were giving them more space and time than they would normally. The climbing community had an intuitive understanding of moments like this. You know what's amazing? She continued, running her hands along the straps of the harness. For the first time in years, I don't feel like I need to just endure this kind of help. I actually feel taken care of. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just as an instructor, but as a human being. This was why he loved working with people. These moments when someone discovered they could trust again, when they realized they deserved to be treated with respect and kindness. That's exactly how it should feel, he told her. Equipment fitting should never be something you have to endure. It should be about making sure you're safe and comfortable, so you can focus on the fun part. She was standing taller now, with a confidence he hadn't seen from her all morning. The transformation was remarkable. The nervous, anxious person who had walked into the gym had been replaced by someone who looked ready to take on challenges. I think I'm ready to try climbing now, she said, and her voice carried a strength that hadn't been there before. I think you are too, he agreed. But remember, we can take this same approach with everything else today. If you need me to explain something, or slow down, or take a break at any point, just let me know. As they walked toward the climbing wall together, he reflected on what had just happened. In his 3 years of instruction, he had helped hundreds of people overcome their fear of heights. But this was different. This wasn't just about conquering a physical challenge. This was about healing from past hurt and learning to trust again. She had taught him something important too. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is simply slow down and show them the respect they deserve. Sometimes being truly helpful means taking the time to do things right, rather than just doing them quickly. The climbing wall stretched up in front of them, full of colorful holds and challenging routes. But they had already accomplished something much more significant than any climb could offer. They had proven that trust could be rebuilt, that respect could heal old wounds, and that sometimes the most important victories happen before you ever leave the ground. Thank you, she said as they approached the base of the wall. Not just for the climbing lesson, but for showing me what this should feel like. He smiled, feeling honored to have been part of her journey. Thank you for trusting me with your story. You're going to be an amazing climber. And somehow, he knew that was true.